a few patients of mine who have graduated from the psych ward and have moved forward back into society.
Generational trauma stops with your mama. You're listening to Work It Lady, where the goal is for all ladies to be the best versions of ourselves. And if you happen to be a mom, be the best mom ever and maintain your sanity while we do it.
Hey ladies, thanks so much for joining another episode of Work It Lady podcast. Today we are going to be talking about mental health, and to help us really explore this subject a little bit more in depth, we have a registered nurse specializing in psychiatry and mental health. Her name is Sabine, and I'm so happy she's going to be joining us today. Many of us, in some way or another, may experience a mental health crisis throughout our life. We may struggle with mental health due to different things that we've been through in our lives. So it's always good to get kind of an insider take, an insider perspective, and have them really share some key facts, knowledge, and understanding with us. So again, I'm so happy Sabine has decided to join us today, and we're going to have a really great chat. So one thing I want to ask you too is, oftentimes we see what I feel is a trauma cycle surrounding a person. Like, you know, they get to you, you know, they're at the psych ward, but there's been multiple events, not just happening in their lives, but their parents' lives and their parents' lives, that all kind of bottleneck, and then you get this person that's in the psych ward. Either that or they have the genetics. But for those who don't have the genetic factor, it's usually a multitude of things that lead people there. And I'll give an example. You know, let's say, you know, the great-grandma, you know, died when the mom was 2. And so then there's a void. And so that child may have had some emotional disconnect, or may have, you know, just not been able to fully cope with that loss. And that might even have a socioeconomic impact too, because then they could not maybe go to college or do some of the other things that they needed to do. And so then you get to the next generation, and there's still that void and unresolved trauma and some tension and anger. And maybe that next generation has an early loss of a parent or relative too. And or maybe they're, you know, have a physical ailment or something that is affecting them. And then you get to that third person who then is there at your psych ward, and it's 1, 2, 3 stories combined into one that have really caused that event to happen. So I just want to kind of ask you, you know, and you may not have really, you know, seen that exact example, but what do you feel as someone working in the field that what is something that we could as people do to kind of help prevent that a bit? And there might not always be an answer. There might not be anything that could be done, but how do we kind of cope with some of these generational trauma cycles that cause us to end up in the psych ward?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, the first part is to be aware that it is a generational cycle that's going on.
Right.
And then it's how do you actively break that? Mm-hmm. Because that takes a lot of effort, more than people think, because what's considered a cycle may be also considered the individual's normal. Right? So what you may think is normal in your family is different from what I may think is normal in my family. Mm-hmm. Right? And so, for example, even when it comes to socioeconomic issues, maybe there are people who have been taught to invest in their family, who have been taught to save, who have been taught to spend their last paycheck because they only live once. Mm-hmm. Right? It is whatever their it is whatever their normal is. Mm-hmm. So how do you break that? Understanding that this is a pattern, not with your generation, but the generations before, and understand that if you want something different, you would have to do something different as well.
That is the absolute truth, and I'll be honest, you know, this is something that a lot of us work through. This is something that I, in some ways, have had to work through to overcome some of these losses that happened before my conception, but still affect me and my family. And I think you said something that is so key, which is making sure that you are aware of what the issues actually are. Because when you feel like this is just me, you know, you're caught in this trauma cycle, well then, hey, you feel alone in that. You feel like, how do I move forward? But when you can kind of say, you know what, some of this happened way before I was even around. There's a lot that I can fix, but there's a lot out of my control. I know that was a freeing moment for me when I felt like, when I just sat back and realized, wait a minute, there's trauma that happened I wasn't even thought about yet. But it still carries on to those generations. But I do have a choice. I can acknowledge it and start doing 180. So me, even if it's something that I liked or something that maybe it worked, I just want to do it differently. Just to avoid ending up in the cycle. Because I'm like, you know what? You can't just keep going through the same thing that's happened. So, you know, broadening your horizons, looking for different solutions to things, handling trauma differently. Like, you know, I look at families that are called, you know, they call them prison families, where, okay, dad was in jail, mom was in jail, the kids do time in jail, and it's like, okay, in a situation like that, I think even if we just said something to ourselves like, okay, mom was in jail, dad was in jail, I don't care what I have to do, I'm not going to jail. And that will make your outlook completely different. Like, okay, well, guess what? I'm not going to handle situation. I'm not going to be that person who has to get in a fight. Right. You know, I'm not that person who has to yell and scream at people, because this is what everybody else in my family did. Like you mentioned, we all think it's normal to yell and scream and do all of that. What can I do different? And it's those little things, you know, that you can really do, and it will change with yourself, and it will make yourself feel better. And then if you go on to have children, you know, it makes their life better too. Can you share with us maybe some of your successes of people who maybe they did need your assistance, but they were able to transition out of needing to be in long-term care, and what do you feel really helped them to make that transition?
Yeah. So a few factors. One, I strongly believe in taking medication if you need to take medication, okay? In addition to that, coping mechanisms, speaking to a therapist. I've seen a few patients of mine who have graduated from the psych ward and have moved forward back into society, okay? And so how were they able to do that? One, being able to find a way of how to cope with their triggers and their own mental illness, as well as going through psychotherapy.
There's the part about triggers that we talked about. Anybody can have triggers. Those of us who've had some past traumatic experience, those triggers are going to be exacerbated. But then we also have the genetic factor. Can you tell us more about that genetic factor as well?
Yes. So some people can have a gene or recessive gene from either parent or both parents, where they may have a gene for a psychiatric mental illness. This could be anywhere from bipolar disorder to psychotic disorders, depression, schizophrenia, things of that sort. And so you may have the gene, but if it's not triggered, you may very well not have those symptoms throughout your entire life, right? So sometimes it takes one traumatic experience to then have an exacerbation of the symptoms for that particular mental illness.
That is very interesting. I've never heard it put quite like that. That's very enlightening. Thank you. So someone could literally have the genes for, let's say, schizophrenia, and they might be able to go their whole life without it if they haven't had all those risk factors pile up or those traumatic triggers pile up.
Right.
Or they may have it, be schizophrenic, and nothing happens. Is that possible?
Yeah, so they may have the gene for schizophrenia, meaning it may run in their family. However, whatever traumatic experience that they have had may either trigger the gene to then be expressed or not.
Very interesting. Very, very, very interesting. So now that we know that we've got two things to consider, we've got the triggering from the environmental stressors or what have you, and then we also have this genetic component.
Okay.
Now, I want to ask you about prevention, because although Sabine is gorgeous and I'm sure she is a fantastic nurse, we are not trying to end up in Sabine's office if we don't need to be there, okay? We are trying to avoid it, okay? And we're happy she's there to help us. We need professionals in the field to make people feel safe, secure, and get the help they need. But I'm sure you yourself would like to see more people not needing your help than needing, right? So in your experience, what can folks do to not end up needing to be in a psych ward?
So first and foremost, as much as you want to try to control everything that happens in your life, the reality is that you cannot control everything, right? So this means if you need help, get help, seek help, okay? And we have many resources for that. We have the hotline, suicide hotline. We have psychotherapy, talk therapy. And so my main thing is, you're right, I don't want to be a witness to sickness if I don't have to, right? Right. I don't want to be a witness to sickness if I don't have to. But if you need the help, you are more than welcome to come and seek help and treat. Okay, so how do we prevent that from even stepping into the ward? First and foremost, I mainly highly suggest self-care. Taking care of yourself, whether that's taking a shower every day, making sure you are presentable every day as far as your hygiene and your actual appearance and grooming, because when you look good, you feel good. Right. So that's one. Number two, when it comes from a mental health standpoint, anything that bothers you from an emotional or mental capacity, talk about it. Talk about it to your friend, a family member, a therapist, which is my most highly, it's actually my best recommendation to speak to a therapist, because it's a professional who specializes in mental health and will not judge you and will help you help yourself along the way. So these are the two steps that I can say can really help someone in terms of preventing them from even going into and being admitted into a psychiatric ward. Taking care of yourself, talking through your problems, whether it's to the person who caused the problems, to the person who triggered the problems, or speaking to a licensed mental health professional.
That is so important. Now I want to pick your brain a little bit more here, and I'm someone who's always been interested in mental health. I took a couple mental health classes in college. I wasn't able to go completely into that, although it was something that I liked, but I've done a lot of reading on it of my own. And when I have a real professional in front of me, someone working in the field, I like to ask them kind of my random off the wall questions. And you can just say true or false, or there's some truth to that, or girl, you must have read that wrong. You know what I mean? But I read one time that some things that you can look out for in yourself to see if you have maybe just some emotional issues that are progressing into mental illness is actually hygiene. Like, hygiene can actually be an indicator, and it's something that sometimes the nurses, because when you go into a facility, you're kind of intaken or triage, and there's certain things that they're looking for, and your hygiene can be one of those things. Even I read that sometimes a very strong body odor can even be a sign of maybe more so a genetic, like when we were talking about before, when that switch has been tricked. Now you tell me, does any of that sound right? Is it wrong? Is this stuff you seen? Are we off the wall?
Well, here's what I will say.
Okay.
There is some truth to that.
Okay.
Hygiene is a big indicator of the status of the mental health within an individual. So typically, if someone is not groomed has not taken a shower in a long time, and just looks unkept, it can be a sign of depression. You ever see there's people who, maybe you've heard the saying where the way your room looks can really provide a meaning and definition to how your brain is working, like how you feel.
Right.
So if you have a messy room, it can be a sign of depression. If you are not groomed, if your hygiene is a little off, it could be a sign of some type of mental health issue that is going on. Okay, so there is some truth to that. There is some truth to that.
Good. Yeah, I think sometimes when we can pick up on these little things, you know, and sometimes you just don't even realize it. You're like, oh, I just don't feel like doing anything. I don't feel like getting up. I don't feel like getting dressed. And when that kind of starts to go on for a long period of time, I think that's when you know, if you can realize it in yourself, not everybody can. You might already be kind of to that point where some of the reasoning ability is starting to slip a little bit. But if you're still at that point, it's like, okay, it's been, you know, 2 weeks and I really haven't given any attention to my hair, or, you know, I'm not showering like I normally do. These could be indicators that, you know, something could really be off.
100%. And that's why I always also suggest people who do live with other family members, ask your family member, hey, check on me. See if there's anything you notice that's different about me. Like, do you see me taking showers? Do you see me cleaning up after myself? Do you see me having pleasure in the main activities that I used to have pleasure in? Or do you see me no longer partaking in them? Right? So sometimes we're not so observant of what's going on in our life, especially when we're going through our own crisis.
Right.
But those who are around us can very well pick up on it.
Something that I've just, you know, kind of read up on and kind of aware of, and you can probably speak a lot to this, is, you know, the childhood trauma can be a thing. Abuse, I feel like at any age, right, could be a thing. Is that also what you're seeing with folks who are coming in?
Oh, 100%. I mean, there's patients who have endured child abuse themselves, have endured influence from drugs themselves or from their environment, whether that's their parents, friends, or other family members as well. So I will say at the end of the day, your experiences are literally what shapes you.
Right.
And so it's important that we're careful about the environment that we not only expose ourselves in, but our children as well, because when they become adults, this is exactly what can happen as far as the triggers go.
Right. And that we hear a lot about that word triggers, and I'm so happy that I feel like the past 10 years, like when I really stop and think about it, we've all become much more aware of mental health, even from people like yourself who, you know, may share some tips on social media, and just reading more about it. So we kind of know that there's this word triggers, and we're still kind of talking along that line, but can you tell us more about what triggers you notice? And when I say trigger, I mean, what triggers a psychotic episode? Because people who are coming to you have had some sort of mental breakdown, or they've done something so kind of maybe, you know, out there that someone said, hey, this is where you need to be right now. What are some of those triggers?
So a trigger tends to be something that reminds people of either their past or something that they've once experienced. It can be when they were a child. It can be something that happened yesterday, to be honest. So, like, for example, you'd have people who, for example, there's people who had their parents have some sort of domestic violence between each other. And so when they see that in their current relationship, that their relationship may turn into one that is more of leading towards domestic violence, it may trigger them to either avoid that relationship, or it may trigger them to act upon domestic violence, right? So everyone has triggers. That's not avoidable. Everyone has triggers, whether it's good or bad. Right? So,
very interesting, very interesting.
So what I've seen in my own experience as a psychiatric mental health nurse is those who are able to graduate and leave, right, the psychiatric award are those who have, one, been compliant with their medication, two, have found ways of how to cope with their own triggers that can exacerbate their mental illness, and then also creating a lifestyle balance. And I say this not only for psychiatric patients, but I say this for every individual, is to have a balance in your life. Because when there is no balance, there's turmoil.
Right.
And turmoil causes crisis. Crisis causes mental health breakdown. Right? So I say this to say, and I think this is the main point that I want to come across, is find a way to put yourself first, take care of yourself, and provide self-care for you. Because if you are not your best caretaker, nobody will be. And you will not be able to be the best servant anybody in your life. Whether that's in the workplace, for your family, for strangers that you come across, for people that you volunteer for, or organizations that you volunteer. So I always say it's best to take care of yourself and put yourself first when it comes to your health. Because if you don't have your health, you don't have anything.
And I am so happy, too, that you're raising awareness around the fact of taking care of yourself. I think that even there's small ways that a lot of women, especially when we're in a trauma cycle, we don't realize that we're not taking care of ourselves. We talked a little bit before about hygiene. Another thing that I feel like women overlook is the things that they eat. And those things can really have an impact on the mental health as well. Sometimes part of that trauma cycle in the family I was talking about are centered around, well, I won't say centered, but can be a contributing factor, being the way that we eat. And, you know, it could be normal for us. It could be normal. This is how we eat in our family. We just don't eat veggies. You know what I mean? You guys know I'm a nutritional health coach. And what I found with the clients that I serve is that there is usually always a correlation, not always, but a lot of the time, between those of us who've been neglecting the quality of things that we eat, and that might be in our control or out of our control due to socioeconomic reasons, not having the money. But there is a correlation between those of us who aren't really putting the nutritional health first and the mental health condition. The women who have been eating bad for a very long time are usually very overwhelmed at the task of transitioning into a healthier way of eating, versus the people who maybe they got some of it together. It's a lot easier for them. So I think, too, I'm, again, happy to be chatting with you about this, because another thing that you're very passionate about is personal training. You guys, Sabine is not only a nurse, but she is also a personal trainer. Yeah. And I think that is so good, because you're combining the care and you're also combining an element of prevention. And I think that when we can actually be preventative and look at how we're taking care of ourselves, being physically active is one of those things. We know, because you work in the field, when you can work out, you're lowering your cortisol levels. Yeah. Just by walking, being active, and then eating good on top of it. So what I found with my personal self is, one of my coping mechanisms, if you will, is eating well and moving. I know then I've done some of that groundwork, so if I get out of control of it, I've got at least some beneficial factors in my pocket that can help me not spiral down. Because if you got them off, you're not eating good, you're not exercising, and you're in a mental crisis, well, you got three things that's taking us down. But if you're in a crisis situation, maybe someone just ran into your car or something, or you've had a loss in the family, at least if your diet and your physical is together, you might be able to deal with that challenge a little bit better, because you've done that preventative work. And so I want to ask you a little bit about those that you are coaching for physical training, the ladies that come to you, how are you able to help them transition from, I'm not exercising into embracing this more, healthy way of life?
Of course. So I train men and women, and I will say that it's a journey. Mm-hmm. It's a journey. I tell them to appreciate themselves along the way, to love their own self along the journey. Mm-hmm. So whether they're looking to be 50 pounds lighter and they're currently obese, well, love yourself while you are obese and in the journey to losing those 50 pounds. Right? So taking it one day at a time, one meal at a time, mm-hmm. one workout at a time. So the process is done in a way where they're able to really seek and reach their goals where it is sustainable. Mm-hmm. It's sustainable. And so I literally go hand in hand. I grab their hand, walk with them along this journey. And so it's a day-by-day process, but there's also some habits that needs to be changed and needs to be altered. There's also some inner work that needs to be done as well. Because a lot of the times that people decide to consume more food than there needs to be can come from an emotional variable, stressors, right? Mm-hmm. And so really targeting those aspects of their life as well will affect their process into achieving their personal training, their fitness goals.
I love it. So now what I want to do is we are going to speak directly to y'all, okay? And I want you to give us just like 3 really easy things. If we are trying to transition, let's say we're signing up for Nurse Sabine's personal training, what are 3 simple things that you give each one of your clients that they can do at home that are easy transitions for anybody?
Sure. 3 things that you can do. Number 1, love yourself in the process. Mm-hmm. Number 2, be aware of your own body, and when it comes to food, listen to your body. Say, am I hungry or am I just thirsty? Mm-hmm. Right? Take your time, literally take your time chewing your food. The more time that you chew your food, you'll realize that you're actually more satiated and full with less food than you are with more, depending on the rate of how long you chew for. Last but not least, move. It doesn't matter whether you're in the gym or whether you are at home. If you decide that you just need to literally take a walk around the block of your home, you can very well do so for 15 minutes. If you decide that you're at home and you need to move, you can very well go up and down the steps. If you are at work, instead of taking the elevator, you can go up the stairs. You can also park at the further parking lot. So these are 3 simple steps that you can take, and I will add on a bonus. Stay hydrated, okay? You can't go wrong with water, and you'll realize that you're more thirsty than you are hungry.
There are a couple in there that I say myself, see, this is why we think alike. I like this. That parking farther away is something I tell folks all the time, and staying hydrated. Sometimes we are actually thirsty and not hungry, and the water actually helps to regulate your food and regulate what you eat too. So then because you've got water in the system, you are able to then have your body put the proteins where it needs to go. Your blood is circulating, so everything's able to be sent to where it needs to go. So definitely, guys, these tips are amazing. I definitely want you guys to give Sabine a follow. Can you please drop your Instagram?
Yes, so my Instagram is @Sabine, the health coach. You can't get it wrong. Follow me for more tips.
Absolutely. And guys, so Sabine puts in work in the gym. So if you also are into like lifting, you do a lot of lifting. She's training her clients here in the New York area how to get fit through lifting weights, engaging that core, getting physically strong. And for me, and you tell me what you think, does lifting weights, is that a stress reliever for you and your clients? You feel like it is?
Oh, 100%. And I will say, as a trainer, I don't only specialize in lifting. I will say that the best form of reducing stress, I like to say, is running. Okay? Running.
Yeah.
Now, the best form of exercise just for fat loss in general without putting too much impact on the body is walking.
Yep.
Okay? As long as you're getting those steps in. But I say do what works for you.
Yeah.
Do what makes you feel good. But get moving.
Get moving, guys. Yep. That is it. We're going to get moving for our physical health, because that is going to also benefit our mental health, because we want to stay positive. We want to stay in a place to where if we need the help, we have, nurses like Sabine that are there. But, maybe we see them a little less frequently than we need to, and we're able to be, parts of society and function well and everything. So I really hope you guys have found this episode to be helpful. I'm so grateful for Sabine sitting down with us today and giving us an inside scoop, day in the life of a nurse who's working in this field. We appreciate you for what you do.
Oh, thank you.
We really do. Thank you for doing what you do. All right, ladies. Thanks for listening to Work It Lady podcast, and we'll see you next time. Bye.